shattered vows. The rain drummed relentlessly against the bedroom window, a cold, rhythmic tapping that seemed to echo the unrest brewing in Daniel's chest. He sat on the edge of the bed, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. He stared at the phone on the nightstand, its screen dark and indifferent. He had read the message 3 times already, but the words felt like glass shards lodged in his mind. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. When can we do it again? J. Daniel's jaw clenched. His pulse thudded in his ears as he replayed the scene in his head. Emily's phone buzzing while she was in the shower, her casual voice calling out, "Can you see who that is?" And then, his world splintering with one message. She emerged from the bathroom, her hair damp, a towel wrapped around her body. "Who was it?" she asked, her voice light, oblivious. Daniel couldn't speak. His mouth was dry, his body frozen in place. Emily's smile faltered as she caught his expression, her eyes flicking to the phone on the nightstand. She moved too, quickly, her hand darting out to grab it, but Daniel was faster. His grip was firm, his eyes fixed on hers as he held the phone just out of reach. "Who's Jay?" The color drained from Emily's face. Her hand fell to her side. Her shoulders slumped. "Daniel, don't lie to me." His voice was a low growl, colder than he intended. "Who is he?" She sank onto the bed, the towel slipping slightly as she buried her face in her hands. "It's not what you think." Daniel laughed, the sound hollow and bitter. "Really? Because it looks pretty damn clear to me." He tossed the phone onto the bed. It bounced once before landing face up, the message still glaring on the screen. "You've been cheating on me." Emily's shoulders shook as she began to cry. "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen." "How long?" His voice was flat, emotionless. He felt detached, as if he were watching this scene play out from somewhere far away. "How long have you been lying to me?" "A few months," she whispered, her voice cracking. It was a mistake. I was lonely, and we've been so distant. I didn't know how to fix things between us." Daniel's hands trembled. "So this is my fault?" "No." Her head snapped up, her eyes red and swollen. "I'm not blaming you. I was confused. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. You were always working, and I felt like I was invisible." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment he saw the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who used to laugh at his terrible jokes, who danced around the kitchen on Saturday mornings, who had once been his everything. But now she was a stranger, someone he didn't recognize. His chest tightened, his vision blurring. "Who is he?" "Just someone from work." It didn't mean anything, Daniel. It was stupid. "I ended it weeks ago." "But he's still texting you," Daniel snapped. It clearly meant something to him. She flinched, her body curling in on itself. "I didn't know how to stop it. I was scared of hurting him." Daniel's laugh was bitter. "You were worried about hurting him? What about me? What about our marriage?" Tears streamed down her face. "I was wrong. I know that. I was weak and selfish, and I can't take it back. But I love you. I never stopped loving you." He shook his head, his throat tight. "I don't even know who you are anymore." They sat in silence, the distance between them an uncrossable chasm. The rain continued its relentless assault on the window, a cold, hollow echo of the tears they could no longer contain. 2 weeks later, Daniel sat in his car outside the office building, the engine idling as he stared at the glass doors. He had spent hours searching through emails, receipts, and social media, piecing together the fragments of Emily's betrayal. Her affair was over, but the lies lingered, suffocating him. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel as he watched a man walk out of the building, tall, well-dressed with dark hair and a confident stride. Jared Thompson, the man who had destroyed his marriage. A surge of anger coursed through him, his vision tinged red. He could confront him, make him pay for the pain he had caused. But what would that accomplish? It wouldn't erase the memory of Emily's tears, her whispered apologies, her desperate pleas for forgiveness. It wouldn't make him whole again. His phone buzzed, breaking his trance. It was a message from Emily. "Can we please talk tonight? I miss you. I miss us." Daniel closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the seat. He was exhausted, his heart a shattered mess. He could walk away, start over without her. But the thought of a life without Emily felt hollow, like a wound that would never heal. Can you forgive her? The question echoed in his mind, an unbearable weight pressing down on him. If he stayed, he would have to face the pain, the anger, the betrayal. He would have to learn to trust her again. That evening, the air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth as Daniel approached the front door. His hand hesitated on the doorknob, his heart thudding in his chest. He had spent the entire drive replaying memories of their life together. The laughter, the arguments, the quiet moments of comfort. But those memories were tainted now, fractured by the betrayal he couldn't erase. He turned the knob and stepped inside. The house was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. It felt cold, unfamiliar, as if it belonged to someone else. "Daniel?" Her voice was soft, tentative, and he found her standing at the edge of the living room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked fragile, her eyes red and swollen, her face pale. She wore his favorite sweater, the one he used to tease, her for stealing. It hung loosely on her frame, a painful reminder of the intimacy they once shared. He closed the door behind him, the sound echoing through the empty space between them. "We need to talk," he said, his voice flat. She nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I know." They moved to the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch. The distance felt insurmountable, a chasm neither of them knew how to cross. Daniel took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Why him?" The words were raw, vulnerable, laced with pain. "Why did you choose him?" Emily's shoulders sagged, her fingers twisting nervously. "I didn't choose him, Daniel. It just happened. I was lonely, and he was there. He listened. He made me feel noticed when I felt invisible at home." His jaw tightened. "So this is my fault? Because I was working hard to give us a better life?" "No!" Her eyes were wide, pleading. "I'm not blaming you. I was selfish. I should have talked to you, but I didn't know how. Every time I tried, you were so distant. It felt like you didn't need me anymore." He looked away, his hands clenched into fists. "I needed you, Emily. I needed you to be honest with me, not to run to someone else." "I know." Her voice broke, a sob escaping her lips. "I was weak. I was stupid. And I hate myself for hurting you." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to scream, to rage, to lash out at her for destroying everything they had built. But all he felt was emptiness, a hollow ache that wouldn't go away. "Do you love him?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No." Her response was immediate, desperate. "I never loved him. It was never about love. It was about feeling something when I was numb. It was wrong. And I ended it because I knew it could never compare to what we have." "What we had," he corrected, his voice cold. "You broke it, Emily. You broke us." Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know, and I would do anything to take it back. I miss you, Daniel. I miss us. I want to fix this. I want to earn your forgiveness." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman he had loved for so long, the woman who was now shattered, just like him. Her pain was raw, genuine, but it didn't erase what she had done. It didn't erase the nights he spent alone, wondering why she was late, why she was distant, why he was never enough. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again." Emily's shoulders shook as she sobbed, her hands covering her face. "I understand. I deserve that. But I'm willing to try, even if it takes the rest of my life. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that you can trust me again." Silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Daniel stood, his legs unsteady. "I need time." She looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "I'll wait, as long as it takes." He turned away, his chest tightening as he walked to the door. But before he left, he paused, his hand on the doorknob. "I loved you, Emily, with everything I had, and you threw it all away." Her sobs echoed through the house as he walked out into the cold night, the rain drenching him as he made his way to his car. But he didn't feel the cold. He didn't feel anything. 3 months later, the sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. Daniel sat alone on the porch of his new apartment, a half-empty beer bottle resting on the table beside him. He stared out at the horizon, his thoughts tangled and heavy. He hadn't spoken to Emily in weeks. After that night, they had exchanged a few strained phone calls, mostly about logistics, bank accounts, bills, the house they had once shared. She stayed with her sister, giving him space to figure out what he wanted, but he didn't know what he wanted. Some days he woke up hating her, resenting her for the pain she had caused. Other days he missed her so much it hurt to breathe. He missed her laughter, her scent, the way she curled up against him at night. He missed his wife. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. A message from Emily. "I signed the papers. They're with my lawyer. If you're sure about this." 2 weeks later. The morning was crisp, a gentle breeze rustling through the trees as Daniel stood outside the courthouse, the divorce papers clutched in his hand. The building loomed before him, cold and imposing, a symbol of finality he wasn't sure he was ready to face. He had thought about this moment every day since receiving Emily's message. He had played out a dozen scenarios in his mind, signing the papers and walking away, confronting her one last time, even begging her to take him back. But no matter how many times he rehearsed it, the answer eluded him. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a message from his sister Megan. "Thinking of you today. No matter what you decide, you're not alone." He managed a faint smile. Megan had been his anchor through the storm, her unwavering support the only constant in his life. She had listened without judgment, let him crash on her couch on the nights when the loneliness became unbearable, and even offered to help him pack up the house. She was his lifeline, keeping him afloat when he felt like he was drowning. His gaze drifted to the courthouse steps, his feet rooted to the ground. He could end it all today. Sign the papers, walk inside, and close this chapter for good. But the thought sent a wave of nausea through him, his chest tightening as he imagined a life without Emily. His phone buzzed again. Another message, but this time from Emily. "I'm here. Upstairs, 2nd floor. Take your time." He stared at the screen, his heart pounding. She was waiting for him, just a few steps away. He could see her one last time before making his choice. His legs moved before his mind could catch up, his body drawn to her like a magnet. He climbed the courthouse steps, his footsteps echoing through the hallway as he approached the 2nd floor. He found her sitting on a bench by the window, her head bowed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore the green dress he had always loved. She looked small, fragile, as if the weight of her guilt was crushing her. She looked up as he approached, her eyes widening in surprise. Daniel. He stood before her, his face expressionless. I thought we should talk before we do this. She swallowed, nodding as she rose to her feet. I'm glad you came. They found an empty conference room, the air heavy, with tension as they faced each other across the table. Daniel's fingers tightened around the papers, the inked lines blurring before his eyes. Emily's gaze was fixed on him, her eyes pleading. I never wanted it to end like this, she whispered. I never meant to hurt you. You have to believe that. He met her eyes, his own hard and unyielding. But you did, Emily. You destroyed everything. Tears welled up in her eyes, her voice breaking. I know, and I hate myself for it. I hate myself for being so weak, for letting my own insecurities ruin the best thing that ever happened to me. Daniel looked away, his jaw clenched. Why didn't you just talk to me? Why didn't you tell me you were unhappy? She wiped her eyes, her shoulders slumping. Because I was scared. I was scared you'd look at me the way you're looking at me right now, like I'm nothing. The words cut deep, his chest tightening as he remembered the love they once shared. He had never imagined he could look at her with so much anger, so much pain. But here they were, broken and lost. He ran a hand through his hair, his voice low. I loved you, Emily. I trusted you. And you threw it all away for him? She shook her head, her eyes wide with regret. It wasn't about him. It was never about him. It was about me, about feeling worthless, about losing myself. I was so desperate to feel needed that I let him fill the void you left behind. He stared at her, his heart aching. I never stopped needing you, Emily. I was just too stupid to show it. Her face crumpled, a sob escaping her lips. I would do anything to go back, to fix this. I would do anything to make you love me again. Silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Daniel's vision blurred as he looked at her, his chest tightening with a pain he couldn't bear. He set the papers on the table, his hands trembling. I came here to sign these. I came here to end it, to finally walk away from you. Her face paled, her body tensing as she stared at the papers. If that's what you need, I won't fight you. I love you too much to keep hurting you. He looked down at the documents, the inked lines taunting him. It would be so easy to sign them, to end his pain by ending them. But the thought of walking out of this room, of leaving her behind, felt like losing a part of himself. His voice wavered as he spoke. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Tears streamed down her face. I understand. But I'll spend the rest of my life trying if you'll let me. Daniel's chest tightened, his heart pounding as he faced the choice that would define his future. 6 months later, the house felt different. Not just because they had rearranged the furniture or repainted the walls, but because the air itself seemed lighter, less burdened by the ghosts of their past. The echoes of angry words and shattered. Trust no longer haunted each room. They were learning to live together again, slowly and painfully, one day at a time. Daniel stood in the kitchen, his hands covered in flour as he rolled out the dough for Emily's favorite pie. It had become his Saturday ritual, a small gesture to show her he was still here, still trying. He glanced at the clock, noting that she'd be back from her counseling session soon. She never missed a week. Her commitment to change a glimmer of hope he clung to. The front door opened, and he heard her footsteps in the hallway, the familiar rhythm bringing a bittersweet comfort. She appeared in the doorway, her hair windswept, cheeks flushed from the cold. Hey, she said softly, her eyes lingering on him as if still amazed that he was there. Hey, he replied, wiping his hands on a towel. How was your session? She leaned against the counter, her gaze thoughtful. Hard. but good. Dr. Harris says I'm making progress, facing things I used to run from. He met her eyes, his heart tightening. There was a vulnerability in her now, a rawness that both terrified and comforted him. She wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't pretending to be perfect. She was just real. "That's good," he said, his voice steady. "I'm glad." They stood in silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing between them. It was always like this, fragile, uncertain. They were still learning how to talk to each other, how to share their hearts without fear of being shattered. Emily took a breath, her eyes fixed on his. "Daniel, can we talk? Really talk?" His stomach clenched, but he nodded. "Yeah, I think we need to." They sat on the couch, facing each other, the distance between them both literal and metaphorical. She fiddled with her wedding ring, the faint glimmer of gold catching the light. "I know I've said it before, but I need you to hear me. I'm sorry, not just for what I did, but for who I was, who I let myself become." Her voice shook, but she held his gaze. "I was selfish. I was weak. And I hurt you in ways I can't even understand. But every day I wake up wanting to be better. For you. For us." His chest tightened, a lump forming in his throat. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust her words. But the scars were still there, raw and aching. "I'm trying to forgive you," he admitted. "But some days I just can't forget." Her face fell, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I know. I see it in your eyes when you look at me. I feel it when you pull away, even when you don't mean to. I hate what I did to us. I hate that I destroyed the trust we built." Daniel looked down at his hands, the scars on his knuckles faint reminders of the anger he used to carry. "Sometimes I wonder if we're just fooling ourselves, if it's even possible to rebuild what we had." She reached out, her fingers brushing his. "Maybe we can't rebuild what we had, but maybe we can build something new, something stronger." He looked up, his heart aching. "How do you know? How can you be so sure?" Her eyes softened, a small, sad smile forming on her lips. "Because I wake up every day and choose you, even when it's hard, even when you can't look at me. I choose you, Daniel, and I'll keep choosing you until you believe it." His breath hitched, the tears he had fought so hard to hold back spilling over. "I want to believe you. I want to move on. But I don't know how." She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "Then let's learn together. One day, at a time. No more lies, no more hiding. Just us, trying to be better." He closed his eyes, his heart pounding as her words washed over him. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, days when the pain felt unbearable. But maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, his tears mingling with hers. They stayed like that, tangled in each other's arms, the world outside fading away. For the first time in a long time, Daniel allowed himself to hope. They had a long road ahead, filled with uncertainty and pain. But they also had a choice, a chance to heal, to forgive, to rebuild. Maybe they could find their way. Maybe they could learn to love again. End. 6 months later, the early summer sun cast long golden rays across the front yard as Daniel adjusted the "For Sale" sign, pressing it firmly into the soft earth. He took a step back, his hands resting on his hips, and exhaled slowly. The house stood behind him, weathered, lived in, filled with echoes of both joy and pain. Emily emerged from the front door, a box in her arms, her expression a mix of sadness and acceptance. "I didn't think this day would actually come." Daniel offered a small, tired smile. Neither did I. Their decision to sell the house had come after months of long conversations. Therapy sessions had revealed the extent to which the space they shared had become a prison of old memories. They needed a fresh start. Whether together or apart was still uncertain. As they loaded the last of the boxes into Daniel's car, Lily bounded out of the house, clutching a teddy bear in one hand and a rainbow-colored drawing in the other. "Is this our new home, Daddy?" she asked, her eyes bright and hopeful. "Not yet, sweetheart," Daniel said, kneeling down to her level. "But we'll find one soon, somewhere with lots of space to play." Lily grinned and ran to the car, climbing into the back seat. Emily watched her, a wistful look softening her features. "She's handled all this better than I expected." "Kids are resilient," Daniel said, his voice tinged with pride. "I think we could learn a lot from her." Emily nodded, her hands twisting the fabric of her shirt. "Where do we go from here?" Daniel hesitated. It was the question they had been dancing around for months, the answer constantly shifting between them. "I think we take it slow. Focus on Lily, on healing. And us?" Her voice trembled, the vulnerability raw and exposed. He looked at her, taking in the woman he had known for so long, the woman who had hurt him, but who had also fought to make amends. "I don't know yet. I need to figure out who I am outside of this place, outside of us." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not look away. "I understand. I'll give you all the space you need." Daniel reached out, his fingers brushing hers, a brief, gentle connection. "I'm not saying, 'Goodbye, Emily, just see you later.'" Her lips quivered into a fragile smile. "See you later." They closed the trunk together, the weight of their past finally giving way to the uncertain promise of a future. 1 year later. The new house was modest, nestled on a quiet street with a backyard that stretched into a patch of wildflowers. Daniel sipped his coffee on the back porch, watching Lily chase butterflies with a newfound sense of freedom. Emily's car pulled up to the curb, and Lily's face lit up. "Mommy!" she squealed, abandoning the butterflies to run into Emily's arms. Emily lifted her, spinning her around, laughter filling the warm afternoon air. She set Lily down, and the girl dashed back into the yard, leaving her parents to exchange quiet smiles. "How's the new place?" Emily asked, leaning against the porch railing. "Good. Peaceful." He gestured to the garden. "I planted some tomatoes. They're actually growing." She chuckled. "You always said you didn't have a green thumb. Turns out I just needed the right soil." They stood together, the conversation easy, unforced. The past year had been transformative for both of them. Emily continued therapy, focusing on understanding her choices and rebuilding trust, while Daniel had thrown himself into his work, finding solace in new routines and creative projects. "I've been thinking," Emily began, her voice cautious, "about us, about what you said, taking things slow." Daniel turned to her, his expression open yet guarded. "I know I hurt you, and I know it's been a long road, but I'd like to try again. If you're ready." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he let the silence stretch between them, measuring the truth of his own feelings. There was still pain, still scars that hadn't fully healed. But there was also hope, fragile, but real. "I think I'd like that," he said finally. "But it has to be different. Honest. Real." Emily's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I promise." They stood together, watching as Lily danced through the garden, her laughter a reminder that life, even after the deepest wounds, could bloom anew. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over their small world, they took the first steps toward something new, Something rebuilt not on the ashes of the past, but on the promise of what could be and 3 months later. The soft hum of voices filled the coffee shop as Daniel sat by the window, his fingers wrapped around a warm mug. He watched raindrops race down the glass, their erratic paths mirroring his thoughts. The past few months had been a delicate dance of boundaries and cautious rebuilding. He and Emily were taking things slow, co-parenting Lily, sharing brief conversations, and occasionally having dinner as a family. But there was no rush to define what they were or what they might become. A soft chime announced her arrival. Emily spotted him and offered a small smile before weaving through the tables to sit across from him. "Hey." "Hey." He gestured to the cup already waiting for her, steam curling above the chai latte. "Figured you could use a warm drink on a day like this." Her eyes softened. "You remembered?" Some things stick. They fell into a comfortable silence, the rain a gentle backdrop as they sipped their drinks. Emily glanced out the window, her expression distant. "Lily asked me yesterday if we were ever going to live together again." Daniel's chest tightened. "What did you say?" "That I didn't know. That sometimes grown-ups need time to figure things out." She looked at him, her eyes searching. "I told her we were trying to be the best parents we could be, even if we were apart." He nodded, appreciating her honesty. "That's all we can do right now." Her gaze dropped to her cup, fingers tracing the rim. "Do you think we'll ever find our way back?" Daniel leaned back, considering the question. "I think we're finding our way forward. Whether that's together or apart, I don't know yet. But I do know that we're better than we were." Emily's shoulders relaxed, a quiet relief settling over her. "I can live with that." They finished their drinks, exchanging small talk about Lily's latest school project and Daniel's garden, which had surprisingly thrived. When they finally stood to leave, Emily hesitated, her hand hovering near his arm. "Thank you for giving us this chance, for not giving up." Daniel looked at her, the familiar ache tempered by acceptance. "Thank you for fighting to rebuild my trust." As they stepped out into the rain, sharing an umbrella, there was no grand declaration, no promise of happily ever after. Just two people, trying to navigate the uncertain waters of forgiveness and possibility, and for the first time in a long while, that was enough. End. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves a tapestry of gold and crimson, as Daniel watched Lily play in the park. She laughed as she jumped into a pile of leaves, her joy infectious, pure. He smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Emily arrived a few minutes later, carrying a thermos and a small paper bag. "Hot chocolate and apple cider donuts," she announced, her eyes twinkling. "Thought we could use a little fall spirit?" Daniel's smile widened. "You always did know how to do autumn, right?" They sat on a bench, side by side, their shoulders occasionally brushing. Lily ran over, face flushed with excitement. "Look, Mommy! Daddy said we could go on the hayride next." Emily's gaze shifted to Daniel, her expression warm. "You remembered?" He shrugged, his lips curving into a soft grin. "Some traditions are worth keeping." They watched Lily race back toward the play area, her energy boundless. Daniel took a sip of hot chocolate, letting the rich sweetness settle on his tongue. "She's happy. Really happy." Emily nodded, her voice quiet. "She's been asking fewer questions about us, about the house. That's good." Daniel's eyes were fixed on their daughter, but his thoughts were miles away. "It means she feels safe, loved." They sat in comfortable silence, the distant sound of children playing blending with the rustle of leaves. Emily's hand rested on the bench, her fingers just inches from his. "I've been thinking about what you said." About moving forward. Daniel turned to her, his expression open. Yeah? I want to be honest, she began, her voice wavering. I miss us. Not the way we were, but who we were when we were good, when we were real. Her eyes glistened, emotions raw and unguarded. I want to find that again. If you're willing. Daniel's chest tightened, his heart pounding. He had thought about this moment, replayed it in his mind 100 times, each scenario ending differently. But now that it was here, he was at a loss for words. I miss that too, he admitted, his voice low. But I'm still scared. I don't want to go back to who we were when everything fell apart. Emily's fingers inched closer, a silent invitation. Neither do I. I want to build something better, honest, real. His gaze fell to her hand, the delicate vulnerability in that small gesture. Slowly, cautiously, he reached out, his fingers brushing hers before intertwining. It was tentative, uncertain, but it was a start. We'll take it slow, he said, his voice steady. Day by day. No promises, no expectations. A tear slipped down Emily's cheek, but her smile was radiant. I can live with that. They sat together, fingers intertwined, watching their daughter dance through the leaves. In that moment, they weren't fixed, they weren't perfect, but they were trying, and that was enough. And 2 years later. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange as Daniel sat on the back porch, a cold drink in his hand. The yard was alive with laughter. Lily was chasing the family dog, her giggles echoing as the golden retriever playfully dodged her. Emily joined him, carrying a plate of freshly grilled vegetables. She set it on the table, sinking into the chair beside him. She's getting so big. Too fast, Daniel agreed, his eyes never leaving their daughter. She's losing her first tooth soon. How did that happen? Emily laughed softly. Time doesn't wait for us to catch up. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Lily twirl in the fading sunlight, her joy infectious. It was these moments Daniel had learned to cherish, the little pockets of happiness that made all the struggles worth it. Emily leaned back, her eyes on the horizon. I got the call today. He turned to her, curiosity piqued. From the publisher? She nodded, a proud smile lighting up her face. They want to publish the book. It's really happening. Daniel's face broke into a wide grin. Emily, that's incredible. Without thinking, he pulled her into a tight hug, his excitement genuine. I'm so proud of you. Her arms wrapped around him, lingering just a moment longer than expected. When they pulled apart, her eyes were shimmering. I couldn't have done it without you, without everything we've been through. Daniel's expression softened. It made us who we are. Emily looked down, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her chair. I wrote about it. Not all of it, but about us. About breaking and rebuilding. He exhaled, the truth settling between them. That's a story worth telling. Their eyes met, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They were still healing, still learning to trust. But they were also growing together. Lily ran up to them, breathless and beaming. Daddy! Mommy! Look! She held up a small white tooth, her face glowing with pride. It finally came out. They both burst into laughter, the joy pure and unfiltered. Daniel ruffled her hair, his heart swelling. Guess the tooth fairy's coming tonight. Lily's eyes sparkled. I hope she leaves me a whole $1. As she ran back into the yard, Daniel felt Emily's hand rest on his. He looked down, his fingers instinctively curling around hers. It was easy, natural. I'm glad we didn't give up, Emily whispered, her voice steady but vulnerable. On us. On this, Daniel's throat tightened, emotion washing over him. Me too. They watched the sunset together, hand in hand, the past no longer a burden, but a part of their story, one they had survived, one they were still writing, and for the first time Daniel didn't just hope for a future, he believed in it. End. 3 years later. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Lily playing in her room. Daniel leaned against the counter, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the kitchen. He hadn't always been a morning person, but lately he found solace in these early moments, before the chaos of the day began. Emily walked in, her hair a bit messier than usual, but her eyes bright. She gave him a tired but affectionate smile. "I thought you'd be awake by now." "I like the quiet," Daniel grinned, handing her a mug. "And I thought you could use some caffeine." She took the mug, her fingers brushing his for a split second. "You're right about that." They sat at the kitchen table, sipping their coffee in comfortable silence. It was moments like these that made Daniel feel like they had finally found their rhythm. They were no longer living in the shadow of the past, no longer chained by the weight of old wounds, but the scars were still there, not always visible, but still present. And some days, the quiet felt like a lull before a storm. "How's the book coming along?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. Emily smiled, a flicker of pride in her eyes. "It's done. The manuscript. I'm just waiting on the final edits before it goes to print." She paused, her gaze shifting to the window. "I still can't believe it's happening. It feels like a dream." "It's not a dream," Daniel said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "You earned this." She looked at him, her expression filled with gratitude. "You've been my rock, every step of the way." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the mug. "I've had my share of mistakes, but I think we've both come a long way." Emily nodded. "We have." Their eyes met, and for a moment, everything seemed to settle into place. The pain, the heartache, the lies, those things had shaped them, but they had also pushed them toward healing. Together. Lily's laughter echoed from the other room, breaking the stillness. Emily and Daniel shared a smile, the kind that only years of shared history could create. "You know," Emily said, her tone more serious, "sometimes I wonder if we'd still be here, if we hadn't fought for it, for us." Daniel's voice was steady, but there was a weight in his words. "I'm glad we did, but it's not just about fighting for us anymore. It's about being here, together." Emily's eyes softened, her hand finding his across the table. "Yeah, it's about now, and the future." Lily ran into the room holding a book in her hands. "Mom! Dad! Look what I made!" They both stood up, moving toward her. As she showed them the colorful pages she had filled with drawings, Daniel felt a surge of emotion. In the simple act of parenting, in the quiet moments they shared, they were building something stronger than they had ever realized. They weren't perfect, they weren't healed completely, but they were in this together, and sometimes that was enough. End. 4 years later. The house was filled with the sounds of life. The rustling of papers as Lily worked on her latest school project at the dining room table, the quiet clink of dishes being set in the sink, and the occasional laughter from the living room where Emily and Daniel were huddled on the couch watching an old movie. It was a Sunday evening, the kind of night where the world felt still. But there was an underlying hum of warmth, of togetherness, of something that had taken time to build and nurture. Daniel glanced at Emily as she laughed at a line from the movie. It was a sound he'd grown to treasure, the unguarded, genuine joy that came from knowing they were past the point of just surviving. They were living, together, You know, Emily said, turning toward him, I think we might actually be happy. Daniel raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching in amusement. Might? She grinned, her eyes sparkling with that same playful energy he'd loved from the start. Okay, we are happy. I can say it now. It's real. Daniel chuckled softly, the sound deep and warm. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. I'm glad you feel that way. I think I'm starting to believe it too. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, simply holding hands, the weight of their journey shared between them. They had fought for this, for themselves, for their family, for the chance to rebuild what had been shattered. And now, it was more than just survival. It was a quiet, steady contentment. I've been thinking, Emily said, breaking the moment, about what's next, about the book, and about us. Daniel tilted his head, curious. What do you mean? She bit, her lip, the nervousness creeping in. I know we've been taking it slow, but I feel like we're finally at a place where we can really look at the future. Without all the baggage. Without wondering if we're going to fall apart again. He took a deep breath, the weight of her words settling in. Yeah, I've been thinking the same thing. Emily's voice softened. Maybe it's time for more, for something bigger. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He knew what she was hinting at. It wasn't just about their relationship, it was about life, about what they could still achieve, together. The possibilities were endless, but the fear of repeating the past still lingered at the edges of his thoughts. But for the first time in a long while, he realized that the fear no longer held him back. They had been through the storm, had weathered it together, and come out the other side. He reached over, cupping her face gently in his hands. Whatever comes next, I'm ready. As long as it's with you. Emily smiled, her eyes shimmering, with unshed tears. I'm ready too. Lily's voice interrupted the moment, calling from the hallway. Mom, Dad, I need help with my project. They both laughed, standing up together, their hands still entwined. As they walked to the next chapter of their lives, they knew there would still be challenges, still moments of doubt. But for the first time, they were no longer afraid of what might come next. They had found their way back to each other, and that was enough to face whatever the future might hold. 5 years later, the kitchen was alive with the sound of sizzling bacon and the hum of the coffee machine. Daniel stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease, while Emily set the table with the kind of care that had become second, nature. It was a Saturday morning, quiet, unhurried, the kind of morning that felt like it belonged to them alone. Lily was already downstairs, her backpack packed and ready for the weekend trip with her friends. They had planned a quick getaway to a nearby lake, a tradition they'd started when she was young. As much as Daniel hated the idea of her growing up, he had come to accept that change was part of life. Emily came up behind him, wrapping her, arms around his waist. You know, she said, her voice low and teasing, you're getting good at this whole house husband thing. Daniel chuckled, leaning back into her. I've had plenty of practice. Her fingers traced the edge of his shirt, a soft smile playing on her lips. I'm glad you're here, with me. I don't take it for granted. He turned to face her, pulling her closer. Neither do I. It's everything. They had come so far. From the betrayal, the pain, the silence. Everything had led them to this moment. A place where they could look back without being haunted by the past. A place where they could look forward with hope. Their daughter appeared in the doorway, her energy bouncing off the walls. I'm ready. Can I go now? Daniel smiled, setting the spatula down. You're leaving without even saying goodbye? Lily rolled her eyes playfully. I said goodbye like 10 times this morning. Emily stepped forward, pulling her into a hug. "Have fun, honey. Be safe." Lily grinned. "I will. See you Sunday." As she ran out the door, Daniel and Emily exchanged a quiet glance. The house felt a little emptier without her, but it was a kind of emptiness they had learned to embrace. The silence settled between them, but it wasn't the kind that used to feel heavy and suffocating. Now it was peaceful. Emily looked up at Daniel, her eyes soft with something deeper. "You know, I've been thinking about something lately. About our future. About us." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated for just a moment, then met his gaze. I think we're ready for the next step." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He had a vague sense of where she was going with this, but it felt different this time. There was no rush, no weight of unspoken resentment between them. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice gentle. Emily's lips curled into a slow smile. "We've built this life from nothing, and I think it's time we give back. Help others. Maybe start something together, a business, a non-profit. I don't know yet, but I feel like we're ready to take the next step." The idea hung in the air between them, the possibility of a future that wasn't just about surviving, but about thriving. Daniel took a deep breath, considering. "I think you're right. We've rebuilt, but now we can make something bigger. Together." They stood there for a moment, the weight of the decision settling in. It wasn't a small step, but it felt right. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about what they could offer to the world. "I'm with you," Daniel said, his voice steady. "Whatever we decide, I'm in." Emily kissed him, slow and lingering. "I think we're finally ready for the world, as long as we have each other. I think we can handle anything." They stood there, wrapped in the warmth of their shared dream. The future was wide open, full of possibilities. And for the first time in years, they didn't feel afraid. The past was behind them. The present was theirs. And the future, whatever it held, was something they would face together. End. 6 years later. The soft buzz of activity filled the cozy community center, the hum of voices, laughter, and the clink of coffee cups creating a backdrop to the work that had become their passion. Daniel and Emily sat side by side at a small table, their faces illuminated by the glow of their laptops as they worked on their latest project, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting families navigating personal crises, much like their own. The years had softened the edges of their past wounds, but it hadn't erased them. Instead, they had transformed those experiences into a source of strength, a shared purpose. It wasn't just about healing anymore. It was about offering a hand to others in need, showing them that it was possible to rebuild even when everything felt broken. "How are we looking for the fundraiser next month?" Emily asked, glancing up from her screen. Daniel rubbed his eyes, a tired but contented smile on his face. "I think we're on track, the venue's booked, and we have a solid list of donors confirmed. I'm confident we'll hit our target." Emily raised an eyebrow, her voice teasing. "Confident, huh? You know, I never thought I'd see the day when you turned into the eternal optimist." He grinned, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "I had a good teacher." His gaze softened as he met her eyes. "I think we're finally in a place where we can really make an impact." She leaned back in her chair, looking around the room at the volunteers and visitors who had come to rely on the center for support. "It feels like everything we've done has led us here, doesn't it? All those late nights, the stress, and now we're part of something bigger than ourselves." Daniel nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. "It's more than I could have ever imagined when we first started. When I thought we might never get past everything we went through." Emily's expression softened, her hand finding his, across the table. "We were strong then. stronger than we gave ourselves credit for. There was a quiet moment between them, one of reflection. All the pain, the betrayal, the lies, the distrust. Those had been the building blocks of something more. They had taken the wreckage of their marriage, their family, and turned it into something new, something hopeful. "And Lily?" Daniel asked, his voice shifting slightly, as though he couldn't help but worry, even after all this time. Emily smiled, her eyes lighting up with warmth. "She's doing great. She's been helping out with the new outreach program, actually. I think she wants to follow in our footsteps." Daniel let out a soft laugh. "Just what we need. A third partner in crime." "She's got a good heart," Emily said, her voice filled with pride. "And she's so much like you, Daniel. She wants to help. She's got that same determination." Just then, the door to the center opened, and Lily walked in, her arms full of bags from a local store. She caught sight of them and grinned. "Hey, I brought lunch." Emily stood up, giving her daughter a quick hug. "You didn't have to do that, sweetheart." Lily shrugged, setting the bags down on the counter. "You two are always working so hard. Figured you'd need a break." She glanced at her parents, her gaze shifting from one to the other. "You know, I was thinking about what you guys do here, and I want to help more. I don't just want to be the kid behind the scenes, I want to do more." Daniel exchanged a look with Emily, both of them surprised by the depth of Lily's words. "You're already helping," Emily said softly. "Everything you do makes a difference, I know, but—" Lily hesitated, glancing down at the floor for a moment before looking back up, her eyes full of resolve. "I want to do more. I think I have ideas. I don't know yet how, but I want to help in a bigger way. I want to make a bigger impact." Daniel felt his heart swell with pride and concern in equal measure. "You're still young, Lil. It's okay to take things slow." "I know," she said, her voice firm. "But I've learned from you both that sometimes you don't wait for things to happen. You make them happen." Emily smiled, a mixture of admiration and love in her gaze. "Well, we've always tried to teach you that." Lily's voice dropped lower as she added, "I want to make sure no one else has to go through the things you did. Because you guys helped me see there's always another way." Daniel squeezed her hand, his throat tight. "You're already on the right path." The room was filled with the quiet hum of the busy community center, but in that moment, it felt like everything had come full circle. They were no longer just a family trying to survive. They were a family who had healed, who had grown, and who were now giving back. They were showing others that recovery was possible, that even the deepest wounds could, with time, transform into a force for good. As Lily set to work with the others, Daniel and Emily stood side by side once more. 7 years later. The sun was setting over the quiet streets of the small town, casting long shadows across the community center where Daniel, Emily, and Lily had spent countless hours working. The center was thriving, bustling with activity as people from all walks of life came seeking help, guidance, and connection. It had become a cornerstone of the community, a place where people could find a sense of hope in the midst of hardship. Inside, Daniel stood behind the counter of their makeshift cafe, chatting with a volunteer while Emily was across the room, organizing a workshop for families. Lily, now in her early 20s, was busy coordinating the outreach team, her confidence and leadership shining through. She had grown into someone they could both be proud of, not just for what she had accomplished, but for the way she had come to embrace her own journey. Daniel wiped his hands on a towel, glancing over at Emily. She caught his eye and smiled, a warmth in her expression that still made his heart skip. They had been through so much together, and yet here they were, stronger, united in purpose. A few weeks earlier, they had opened a new wing of the center, dedicated to offering therapy and support groups for couples facing challenges like the ones they had once endured. It was a full-circle moment. They had survived their own betrayal, their own broken trust, and now they were giving others the tools to heal, too. Lily approached the counter, a stack of papers in her hands. "Dad, we need to go over the new partnership proposal," she said, her tone all business, despite the smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Daniel nodded, pushing aside the nostalgia that had been creeping in. "Sure, let's take a look." As they huddled around the papers, Emily joined them, having wrapped up her session. Her face was lit with a quiet contentment, the years of emotional strain having given way to a peaceful confidence. "I think we have a solid foundation here," Emily said, her eyes scanning the proposal Lily had brought in. "We've got the funding lined up, and the local businesses are on board. This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for." Daniel smiled, his heart swelling with pride. They had built something real, something lasting. But as they discussed the next steps, a nagging thought lingered in the back of his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something new, something bigger than what they had already accomplished. There was always the uncertainty that came with growth, the fear of stepping into unknown territory. "Are you okay?" Emily asked, noticing his distraction. "You've got that look." Daniel paused, taking a deep breath. "Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking about the next chapter. This has been everything we dreamed of, but I can't help wondering what more we can do. There's so much more to be done." Lily glanced up from the papers, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Maybe that's the next step. We're building a legacy here. It's about the impact we can have in the long run, not just the work we do today." Emily looked at her daughter, a soft smile spreading across her face. "That's exactly it. It's about creating something that lasts, something that keeps growing even when we're no longer around to see it." Daniel nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. "I guess I'm just afraid of losing sight of it. I don't want to let everything we've worked for slip away." Emily placed a reassuring hand on his. "We won't let it slip away. We've built this together. It's not just about one person, it's about all of us. And as long as we're in this together, we'll keep pushing forward," Lily added with a grin. "And hey, if we need any extra help, we can always count on the community. We've got people who believe in us." The three of them stood there for a moment, the weight of their words settling in. What they had started together was more than just a nonprofit. It was a movement, a community built on trust, love, and resilience. It was proof that even the darkest moments could lead to something brighter. As the last rays of sunlight filtered through the windows of the center, casting a golden glow on their faces, Daniel felt a deep sense of peace. The past had shaped them, but it no longer defined them. They had faced betrayal, loss, and fear, but they had come through stronger, together. For the first time in a long while, Daniel allowed himself to truly believe that whatever came next, they could handle it. Together. And as they sat down to continue planning, the future no longer felt like a distant uncertainty. It felt like an open road, full of possibility and hope. End. 8 years later, the weathered sign above the community center had seen better days, but the building itself, once a modest, humble space, was now a beacon of hope, its walls adorned with thank you notes, success stories, and reminders of the countless lives it had touched. Inside, the place was as vibrant as ever. The center had grown into a network, a lifeline for people facing all kinds of personal crises, from infidelity to financial ruin and everything in between. Daniel sat in his office, reviewing a report on their latest outreach program. The room was quiet, save for the low hum of the heating system. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers lightly drumming on the desk. It was strange to think about how far they had come, how far he had come. There had been times, especially in the early days, when he couldn't imagine a future where things weren't broken, where trust wasn't an elusive dream, and where the scars of the past didn't define every decision. But now, he could see it all clearly. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. A soft knock on the door brought him back to the present. "Come in," he called out, his voice steady but warm. Emily stepped into the room, her presence always a grounding force. Her hair, now flecked with streaks of silver, framed her face in a way that made her look even more beautiful than when they had first met. There was a quiet wisdom in her gaze, a depth that reflected the years of shared hardship, growth, and, yes, forgiveness. "Hey," she said, her voice carrying a softness that only the two of them truly understood. "You're still at it, huh?" Daniel gave her a half smile, pushing the papers aside. "Can't help it. There's always something to improve, something to get right." She crossed the room and sat in the chair across from him, her eyes lingering on his face with a tenderness that never failed to stir something deep inside him. "You know," she said, "you don't always have to be perfect." He let out a small laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm not sure I know how to be anything else anymore." Emily reached out, placing a hand over his. "You've been through enough. We've both been through enough. And look where we are now." He met her gaze, the weight of her words sinking in. "Yeah," he said softly. "But I never want to forget where we came from. I don't want us to become complacent. The world changes, and we have to change with it." She nodded, understanding what he meant. Over the years, they had worked hard to ensure that their mission remained true to its roots, while adapting to the ever-evolving needs of the people who walked through their doors. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving, about ensuring the center stayed relevant, about expanding their reach. And it had been working. A soft buzz from her phone interrupted the moment. She glanced at it, her expression shifting slightly. "Is everything okay?" Daniel asked, noticing the change in her demeanor. Emily hesitated for a moment before putting the phone down on the desk. "It's just a message from Lily," she said, her tone unreadable. "She wants to talk about something, I'm not sure what, but she sounded serious." Daniel frowned, a sudden jolt of worry running through him. "What's going on? Is she okay?" "I don't know," Emily replied, the concern in her voice matching his. "But it's never easy when she calls like that." Lily had always been the most independent of them, but over the years, the emotional strain of what she had witnessed in her parents' marriage had weighed heavily on her. Even though she had grown into a strong, compassionate woman, the scars of their past had never fully healed for her. "Should we call her?" Daniel asked, leaning forward. Emily picked up her phone and dialed Lily's number, her eyes not leaving Daniel's as the phone rang. After a few moments, Lily answered. "Hey, Mom?" "Dad," her voice came through the line, a mixture of calm and tension. "Can we meet? I need to talk." "Of course, sweetheart," Emily said quickly, her concern evident. "Is everything all right?" Lily's silence spoke volumes, and then she exhaled. I think it's time we talk about something big." The words echoed in Daniel's mind as the phone call ended. Lily had never been one to ask for help unless it was absolutely necessary. "What do you think this is about?" Emily asked, her face pale but composed. Daniel hesitated. "I don't know, but we'll find out soon enough." An hour later, they sat across from their daughter at a quiet cafe in town, the air between them thick with unspoken words. Lily, sitting at the corner of the table, looked older than her 23 years, as if the weight of something had suddenly pressed down on her. Her fingers gripped the edge of her coffee cup so tightly that her knuckles were white. "Mom, Dad, I've been keeping something from you," Lily began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something I think you need to know." The silence that followed Lily's words felt suffocating, like the world had shifted beneath their feet. Daniel felt the weight of each breath, heavy and unsure, as if his body no longer belonged to him. "Who?" he asked, his voice tight with a mixture of confusion and dread. Lily hesitated again, her eyes darting nervously between her parents. She had always been a good daughter, never wanting to disappoint them, but this was different. She had crossed a line, and the guilt that flooded her expression was enough to make Daniel's stomach twist in a painful knot. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," Lily said, her voice small. It just happened." Emily's face was unreadable, but Daniel could see the flicker of emotion in her eyes, something between hurt and fear. "Who, Lily?" Emily repeated softly, her voice steady but strained. Lily swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. "It's Michael." The name hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. Michael. It took everything in Daniel to stay composed. Michael had been a cornerstone of the center, one of the first volunteers, a trusted mentor and someone Daniel considered a close friend. They had worked side by side for years, building the foundation of the place they had fought so hard to create. To think that Michael, someone he had trusted, was somehow involved with his daughter was too much to process all at once. Emily's hand trembled as she reached for her coffee cup. "Michael?" she echoed, her eyes wide in disbelief. "Lily, are you sure?" Lily nodded, looking down at the table, unable to meet either of their eyes. "It's been going on for a while now. I didn't know how to tell you. I never thought it would go this far." "How far?" Daniel asked, his voice steady but sharp, like a knife edge. "What exactly has been happening?" Lily took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling as she gathered the courage to continue. "We've been seeing each other for months. I didn't want it to affect the work or the center or you two, but it did. And I think it's getting to a point where it's not something I can hide anymore." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. "This is beyond what I can understand right now, Lily. Michael is like family to us. He's helped us. He's helped you for years. And now—" "I know, Dad," Lily interjected, her voice pleading. "I know, I don't know what came over me. It wasn't supposed to happen. But he's been there for me in ways I didn't expect, in ways you guys don't always see." Emily remained quiet, her gaze distant, as if her mind was racing through every conversation, every moment she had shared with Michael. She, too, was grappling with the enormity of it. This was no longer just about their daughter. It was about everything they had worked to build, everything they had trusted. "I think you need to end it," Emily said, her voice calm but firm. "This is not just about you. It's about the center, about everything we've built together. If Michael has been lying to us, using our trust against us, then he needs to go." Lily's face flushed with guilt and confusion. "Mom, I didn't want this. I didn't want to hurt you. But I don't know what to do now. I'm too deep in it." Daniel's heart shattered at the look of torment in his daughter's eyes. She wasn't the one who had betrayed them. She had been swept up in something that was not just her fault. But Michael was different. He had known better. He should have known better. "What happens now?" Daniel asked, his voice tight. "Do we confront him? Do we throw him out of the center?" Lily shook her head quickly. "No. Please don't do that. I don't want anyone else to know. If you fire him or expose it, everything gets ruined. I don't want that. I never wanted to cause all this." Emily's expression softened, but the hurt in her eyes was undeniable. "Lily, we need to handle this with integrity. I don't know what else to say. Michael has to be held accountable." The room fell into another heavy silence. Daniel's mind raced, but there was no easy answer. He had always prided himself on being the protector, the one who made sure everything was in order, that their family and the center were untouchable. But now, Everything felt like it was unraveling. Not just their daughter's relationship with Michael, but the fabric of trust that had held their family together for so long. I think we need time to think, Daniel said after a long pause, looking at both Emily and Lily. We need to decide what's best for everyone. For you, for us, for the center. Lily nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I'm so sorry, Dad, Mom. I never meant for any of this to happen. Emily reached across the table, gently squeezing Lily's hand. You don't need to apologize, sweetheart. We just need to figure out how to move forward. This is complicated, but we'll figure it out together. Daniel stood up, his legs stiff from sitting for too long. He needed to walk, to clear his head. I'll go speak to Michael. As the days passed, the silence in their home grew deeper. There were no loud arguments, no emotional outbursts, just an oppressive, lingering stillness that filled every room. Lily spent most of her time in her room, her eyes red from crying, her thoughts weighed down by guilt. Emily seemed lost in her own thoughts, retreating to the kitchen or the garden, her movements mechanical. Daniel, meanwhile, buried himself in work, using the center as a refuge from the emotional turmoil that followed the revelation of Michael's betrayal. The guilt that gnawed at Daniel's insides was suffocating. He had spent years building the center, pouring his life into it. Michael had been there since the beginning, helping him make his vision a reality. To lose both the trust of his daughter and his close friend at once was a blow he had never expected to recover from. One evening, after a long day at the center, Daniel came home to find Emily sitting at the kitchen table. There was a glass of wine in front of her, half full, untouched. Her eyes were distant as she stared out the window, the weight of her thoughts heavy in the air. She hadn't spoken much lately, and Daniel wasn't sure whether it was because she didn't know what to say, or if she simply couldn't. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, unsure of how to approach her. The damage to their family had been done, but what came next? How could they begin to rebuild when everything had been torn apart? Emily, he finally said, his voice hoarse. We need to talk. She didn't turn to face him right away. I know, she said softly, her voice low. But I'm not sure there's anything left to say. Daniel walked over to her, pulling out the chair beside her and sitting down. He didn't touch her, didn't try to pull her into an embrace. He knew she wouldn't respond to that now. All he could do was be present. I know you're angry, he said after a long pause, his hands resting on the table, his fingers trembling slightly. And I get it. I should have seen it coming. We both should have. Emily's eyes flickered, a flash of emotion crossing her face before she quickly masked it. You didn't see it, Daniel, she said quietly. None of us did, and that's what hurts the most. We were blind. We trusted him. We trusted our daughter, and now look at what it's all become. Daniel swallowed, the weight of her words heavy on his chest. I never wanted to hurt you, Em. I thought I could protect us, keep everything safe. I didn't know how to handle this. Emily finally turned to face him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I don't know if we can fix this, Daniel. I don't know if I can forgive her. Or him. I don't know if I can forgive you. Her words, cut deeper than he could have imagined. They were a reflection of the rawness she felt, the depth of the betrayal she had suffered. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, his mind swirling with regret. But there was nothing left to say. Nothing but the truth. I don't know either, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. But I want to try, Em. For us. For our family. She looked at him for a long time, the silence between them growing. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt comfortable or safe, but the kind that weighed on the soul. But finally, Emily spoke. Again. I don't know if I can ever look at Lily the same way again. I don't know if I can trust her. She knew what she was doing, Daniel, and she hurt us. Daniel's heart ached at the thought of his daughter, his little girl, caught up in something so complicated, so dark. She didn't want to hurt us, she made a mistake, a big one. But it's not too late for her to learn from it. We can still help her. Emily shook her head slowly. I don't know if we can fix her, Daniel. I don't know if we can fix any of this. A long pause stretched between them. Daniel took a deep breath, steadying himself, feeling the weight of their fractured relationship more than ever. He had spent years thinking that the family they built was untouchable, but now everything felt uncertain. I can't promise you anything, Em, he said quietly. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out, together. Even if it means taking it one day at a time. Emily didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached for her wine glass, swirling it slowly as if trying to focus on something other than the aching silence between them. One day at a time, she echoed softly. I don't know if that's enough. Daniel didn't know if it was either, but it was all they had. Meanwhile, at the center, the weight of Michael's departure hung over everything. The volunteers who had once looked up to him now cast uncertain glances at Daniel, unsure of what had happened, afraid of the truths that were no longer hidden. The center was no longer the same. There was a void in its heart, a space left open by Michael's absence. But, more than that, it was Lily's absence that was felt the most. The days that followed were difficult, a steady mix of small steps forward and painful reminders of how much had been lost. Daniel found himself taking the time to rebuild the foundation of his relationship with Lily, but the cracks were too deep to fix quickly. Each conversation was an effort, each moment with Emily a quiet reflection of the distance between them. Yet amid the brokenness, there was still a trace of something, maybe not the old familiarity, but the possibility of healing. Lily continued to volunteer at the center, though her presence was strained, and she no longer carried the same enthusiasm she once had. Daniel had seen it in her eyes. How the guilt weighed her down, how the shadow of her actions hung over every interaction. It was as if she was searching for redemption, but unsure of where to find it. Emily, too, seemed to be retreating into herself. Her quiet moments were filled with introspection, and the walls she had built around herself grew higher with each passing day. She still helped with the house and the occasional errand, but there was an invisible barrier between them, one that neither of them had yet figured out how to cross. The emotional toll on Daniel was profound. He had built his life on trust in his family, his work, his closest friends. But now it seemed as if everything he believed in had been shattered, leaving only fragments behind. He would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if things would ever return to normal, or if they were all destined to live in the aftermath of this betrayal forever. One evening after dinner, as Daniel sat on the couch with a glass of whiskey, the tension in the room finally reached a boiling point. Emily had been distant all day, and Lily's attempts at small talk had only highlighted the unspoken words that hung between them. The silence had become unbearable. Finally, Emily spoke. Her voice was low, almost hesitant, but there was a rawness to it that Daniel couldn't ignore. We need to talk, she said, her eyes meeting his. About us, about what happens next. Daniel felt his heart tighten. He had been waiting for this moment, dreading it, knowing it was coming but unsure of how to face it. He set his glass down on the table, turning to her. What do you want to say? Emily took a deep breath, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I don't know if I can do this anymore, Daniel. I don't know if I can keep pretending like everything is fine. You and I both know that we're not okay. We're just existing, and I don't know how to fix it. Daniel's chest tightened. The words stung, but they were the truth. He had been hoping that time would heal the wounds, that the space between them would shrink. But now he realized that the distance was growing wider, and neither of them knew how to cross it. "I don't want to lose you," Daniel said, his voice raw with emotion. "But I can't keep pretending like everything is normal either. What do we do?" Emily's eyes were filled with uncertainty as she shook her head. "I don't know. I can't shake the feeling that we're broken, Daniel, and maybe we can't be fixed." The words hit him harder than he expected. Broken. That's what they were. Broken pieces trying to fit together again, but with jagged edges that made it impossible. He had always believed that love could fix everything, that if they just tried hard enough, they could repair the damage. But now, sitting in the silence with Emily, he wasn't so sure. "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered, his voice thick. "I didn't want any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." Emily's face softened, and for a moment, the walls between them seemed to fade. She reached out, her hand resting on his. "I know, Daniel. I know. But sometimes, no matter how hard we try, things fall apart. People fall apart." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of her words lingered in the air, and Daniel realized that their future was not as clear as he had hoped. There were no easy answers, no guarantees of reconciliation or forgiveness. There was only the uncertainty of where they went. From here, Lily, hearing the quiet conversation from the other room, stood at the door, watching them with a conflicted look on her face. She had wanted to listen, to find a way to understand, but the pain of hearing her parents confront the truth of their broken relationship only made her feel more lost. She wasn't sure if she could face them again, let alone fix what she had broken. Later that night, as Lily lay in bed, her mind raced. She thought of Michael, his absence from her life, the betrayal they had both shared. He was gone now, but she couldn't forget how easily they had crossed lines, how quickly everything had fallen apart. She had hoped that if she kept busy, if she just kept moving forward, things would get better. But they weren't. Nothing was getting better. She wondered in the darkness of her room if anyone could truly forgive her. Months passed, and the space between Daniel and Emily slowly began to feel less suffocating. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping reconciliations. What they had was the quiet persistence of small, deliberate efforts, fragile steps toward something that might one day resemble healing. Daniel threw himself into his work, the familiar rhythm of his career providing a temporary distraction from the emotional weight he carried. But every time he looked at Emily, he was reminded of what they had lost, and of the thin thread of trust they were trying to rebuild. He wasn't sure where they were headed, but he had come to realize that the journey might not be about finding their way back to what they were. Instead, it was about figuring out what kind of future they could create together in the wreckage of their past. Lily's attempts to atone for her actions weren't always smooth. She still battled the guilt, the echoes of her own mistakes that seemed to shadow her every move. But she kept her head down, working hard at the center and trying to reconnect with her mother. There were moments, brief, fleeting, that felt like a step forward. Emily, too, was trying. But the cracks in their relationship were still there, jagged and visible, as though they were permanently etched into their hearts. Still, the idea of forgiveness lingered, like a faint promise on the horizon. It wasn't until a rainy Saturday evening, when the tension seemed to resurface, that the real turning point came. Daniel had been out for a walk, hoping the drizzle would clear his mind. He returned home to find Emily sitting on the couch, her gaze distant, lost somewhere between the past and the present. She had a glass of wine in her hand, the remnants of a long, quiet evening. "Is everything okay?" Daniel asked as he closed the door behind him. Emily didn't immediately answer. She took a long sip of her wine before setting the glass down and looking at him. There was an unreadable expression on her face, one that made Daniel's heart thrum in his chest, unsure of what was coming next. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice steady but low, "about what we've been doing and about what we've been avoiding." Daniel's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Emily sighed, leaning back against the couch, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her wine glass. "I know you're trying, Daniel. I know we both are, but it feels like we're living in the past, trying to fix something that can't be fixed. We can't go back to the way things were, and I don't think we should." Daniel's stomach twisted. "What are you saying?" Her gaze softened, but there was something in her eyes, something he hadn't seen in a long time. "I'm saying, maybe it's time for us to stop pretending like everything is fine. Maybe we need to face the fact that we're both different now. The way we were before, it's not enough anymore." The words hung between them like a bitter truth neither had been ready to speak. He had feared this moment, but now that it was here, the fear seemed smaller. This wasn't the end of the world, it was just the end of an era. "I don't want to give up on us," Daniel said, his voice strained, almost pleading. "I don't want to give up on you." "I don't want to give up on you either," Emily replied, her eyes filled with the weight of their shared history. "But I don't think holding on to something that's already broken is the answer. We need to let go. Not just for us, but for Lily too." Lily, who had been silently watching from the doorway, overheard the last part of the conversation. She felt like a trespasser in her own home, unsure if she should stay or leave. The weight of her own guilt hung heavy in the air, and she wasn't sure how to navigate the fractured relationships between the three of them. She cleared her throat softly, and both Daniel and Emily turned toward her. The look in her eyes, a mixture of hope, fear, and resignation, spoke volumes. "I've been thinking too," Lily said quietly, her voice wavering just slightly. Maybe it's time for us to really talk about everything. Not just the things we're supposed to fix, but the things we're afraid to face. I can't fix what I've done, but I don't want to lose you both." The silence that followed was profound. Emily's gaze softened, and for a moment, Daniel saw the smallest flicker of something resembling hope in her eyes. Lily was offering them a bridge, a chance to rebuild, but it wasn't going to be easy. "We're not going to fix everything overnight," Daniel said, the words hanging between them as a gentle promise. "But maybe we can stop running from it. Stop pretending it's all okay." Emily nodded slowly. "Maybe we can. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm willing to try." Lily's lips trembled, and she stepped closer to them, the emotional weight of her words echoing in the room. "I don't know what's next, but I want to try too, for us, for me, for everything